Welcome to the fiscal year 20 Avian Health Cooperative Agreement training. My name is Patricia Fox, the Avian Health Commodity, and I'll be stepping you through all the components of the Avian Health Work Plan for the Cooperative Agreement. Next slide. Please follow the new format. All the objectives will be listed in the workbook. There's a link within the guide to the workbook. The workbook is then completed quarterly and will also then serve as the quarterly report, and it keeps adding your different quarterly accomplishments on there. So it makes it much easier for us to review them for completeness and for you to demonstrate how you're meeting all of your goals. There are two portions that go with the Avian Health Cooperative Agreement. The second portion is the Avian Testing Goal Sheet or the Surveillance Workbook. So there's a link to that on page 14 of the guide. We want to make sure that we're using the January 2020 version. This is where you will fill out the goals of your avian health surveillance testing, and it will automatically tabulate your 4 quarterly reports into an annual report at the end. So your goals will go on the cover sheet, and then that will tabulate as you add on with your additional tabs in the workbook for your quarterly report. Next slide is an example of the Avian Health Goals and Testing Summary. You'll notice that there are grayed out boxes, and those will auto-populate so that they're locked, and you will only fill in the colored boxes for each of the commercial testing goals or NPIP blocks, your live bird market blocks, and your backyard blocks. So we know these are just estimates. So if your estimates are considerably different than they were in the last couple of years, you might want to mention on there why they're different. That either you have more flocks or fewer flocks, or some change that you've had in your state, just so we know why they're changing significantly. But you will use this workbook throughout the entire cycle of the cooperative agreement. So you'll put your goals on this cover sheet as part of your cooperative agreement packet, and then there are 4 additional sheets to the workbook for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. And then you'll notice that the total number annual to-date testing also populates on this sheet. Next slide. Remember that we're trying to go towards a much more quantitative type of cooperative agreement, so we want SMART objectives. That means that they're specific, importantly that they're measurable, they're achievable, realistic, and time-based. So this is a 1-year agreement, so if you can't reach the goal within a year, then it shouldn't be listed here. But the objectives for your cooperative agreement should quantify the amount of things that you expect to do. We want numbers. It's impossible to determine whether objectives have been met unless we can measure them. So if we're looking for 100 tests, then 90 is fine, 110 is fine, 5 is probably not. So we want to make sure that for each of the 6 avian health objectives, we're specific and measurable. Next slide. So objective 1, and the most important one for the avian surveillance, is the avian surveillance objective. This includes only activities that result in the collection of diagnostic samples. So if you're not collecting samples, it would not go on under objective 1. So let me say that again. This is where we are collecting and testing diagnostic samples. So we're going to list NPIP and non-NPIP activities separately. So you'll probably have a lot more things to list under non-NPIP, because most of the NPIP blocks will probably send their samples directly into the lab, and you can list those here. But what we really want is the number of trips. Personnel going out to shows, fairs, FAD investigations, and collecting samples. You can also list other measurable objectives, such as the number of mailers you sent out, or the number of investigations, or things of that type that include diagnostic samples. So surveillance is the cornerstone of this agreement. That's what we're looking for is AI testing. So these objectives with the diagnostic testing associated, which are listed in objective 3, should be the majority of the work activities supported by the agreement. So, next slide. This is an example of the active surveillance and passive surveillance workbook. So listing the NPIP and non-NPIP activities separately. So we want to look at active surveillance for NPIP. Again, there's tricks to those NPIP flocks might be for the smaller flocks. Non-NPIP for live bird markets, subpart E, shows, fairs, swap meets. But again, these are things, shows, fairs, and swap meets. These were where you are collecting diagnostic samples. If you're just going to go do a visual audit, that is not where those trips would fall. They would fall in the next objective. So the next slide is additional examples of our objective 1 surveillance. So these all have an associated diagnostic sample. So that would be testing kits or mailers that might come in. Some people have programs where eggs are tested in or sent in for testing, or samples out boxes and mailers go out to 4-H and they send samples in. But you could put those in here because it is including a diagnostic sample. Also would be the passive surveillance. So those are your sick bird calls that do have tests associated with them and necropsy submissions. Those would be listed here as well. Next slide. Objective 2. These are the general avian health support goals. So this is where the other activities go that do not result in diagnostic samples. This would include audits, inspections, record checks, data entry, things like that. So again, we're going to split up NPIP and non-NPIP activities separately. This is also where equipment and supplies would be listed. And as a reminder, any lab equipment over $5,000, you have to also fill out that laboratory equipment request form that's included in the guide. So again, make sure that we're using measurable objectives such as the number of trips or the number of hours associated with the different activities. But these are activities that do not result in any diagnostic tests. Next slide is an example of the general avian health support objective as listed in the workbook. So you might have on-farm biosecurity audits. You might have paper biosecurity audits. Those are going to be due here in September. Laboratory audits or inspections, hatchery audits or inspections, your data entry for 9-4 forms, and also, again, where you put your equipment and supplies for your field folks. Next slide is our third objective, which is laboratory diagnostics. So this is where you're going to list your tests and your costs. In the previous 2 objectives, we want to list the personnel work that you're doing. This is where you're going to list the actual test. So all tests should be listed as a cost per test, inclusive of all costs, beginning when the sample arrives to the lab and when the results are reported out. And we do have maximum test costs. We don't advertise those. You can call and check on it. But if you do get a note back that you're above the maximum, a lab can only exceed the maximum if they have a published rate that's regularly charged to clients. So some states have state laboratories, and there are published rates. And so if the public sends in a sample, that's how much they're going to pay. We just want to make sure that we're not paying more than the public would pay. So we can only go above the maximum test cost when it's a published rate charged to the public. We do not reimburse laboratories for carrying out engine capture immunoassay testing. That is supposed to be a field level test. It's not necessary for laboratories to carry it out. In fact, it's not as good when it has been held that long. It's meant to be right away in people. So the test kits themselves can be ordered under supplies, and it should be a cost per kit, not a cost per test. And these should be done out in the field and not by laboratories. Again, we have diagnostic necropsies. We want to do as we did last year, which the diagnostic necropsy charge should only include the gross examination. The tests that are done on top of that examination should be listed separately. So this has a maximum of $75 per session for the gross examination. Testing costs are on top of that. Basically, we were getting gross necropsy charges all over the map. And the reason why our tests varied so much in cost is because it is tests that were being added on top of the gross necropsy. So to make sure that what we're paying for the gross examination is fair, we are asking you to put that up. Keep in mind that the number of tests listed in this portion under Objective 3 should match those entered on the spreadsheet that you filled out the avian testing goals for. Next slide is an example of Objective 3, how you'll fill out the cost per test for each type of test you have, that the goals should match that in the spreadsheet, and making sure that the gross necropsy per session is no more than $75 and that testing associated with that is separately. Also keep in mind that other testing that's not AI testing can be included on a limited basis, especially if you're trying to get some of those smaller flocks to participate in the program. And those would be listed down as other avian and GM. These days, especially out west, people might want to do that as well. Next slide is our fourth objective, education and outreach. Again, measurable goals. So the number of trips or events that you did, the number of pieces of educational material that you handed out, the number of fairs or shows or personnel hours involved in going out and doing that education outreach. As a reminder, all educational materials must be approved by LBMS, and please allow 2 weeks for this approval. Send them to your agreement specialist, and then they'll send them on to the different clients that to this material. If the cooperative agreement is paying for it, we need to approve it before it's printed or distributed. The next slide is an example of the workbook filled out for education outreach, where they might have small flock owner training. They want to put the number of classes and attendees or the number of flocks having a class security audit, for example. Next slide is Objective 5. That's where we put our travel and training. A reminder on travel, there are other places in the program guide that tell you all the different information that the cooperative agreement specialist will be looking for when you put your travel request in. But we just want to remind folks that no more than 2 participants per meeting per cooperator. And to include NPIP required training here, a reminder that the training does not go towards your travel cap, so that is not considered part of your travel cap that you can here. And also, you may have a large meeting like USAHA that's being funded across several commodities, and if that's the case, so please list the estimated percentage that's being provided by each one. And the next slide is an example of the travel and training objective in the workbook. And then finally, next slide is Objective 6, preparedness and response. We do ask that the initial state response and containment plan have an annual review. That does not necessarily have to be in person, but that would be the type of thing that would be listed here. We also ask that they're exercised once every 3 years. So that's the type of information that we'd be looking for in Objective 6. You might also list the quarterly maintenance and exercise of depopulation equipment or associated maintenance contracts here. Keep in mind that preparedness and response assets and the cost to maintain them and store them need to be of a reasonable quantity. We can't have a national veterinary stockpile in every single state. And also that all preparedness and response assets are not necessarily funded by the avian commodity if all of those assets are not for avian commodity. So if you have a huge warehouse full of all the preparedness and response assets for all of the commodities, you would expect the cost to be split among all of And measurable objectives, please. And the next slide is the example of the preparedness and response objectives within the workbook, where you might have a number of attendees that come to a meeting to review state response and payment plan. You might have exercises or maintenance runs of your sonar and have to have some equipment personnel for that. And you may also put avian investigations down here as well. So those are the 6 objectives for the avian health commodity. There's a place for just about everything that folks do with avian health surveillance money. If you're not sure of where to put it, what objective to put under, you can certainly call. And next slide, if you have any questions at all about how to put together your cooperative agreement, either the workbook or the surveillance goals build template, feel free to call me. I have examples already filled out, or I can give you an idea how you might fit the things into the workbook that you are already doing. So with that, please feel free to give me a call if you need help, and thank you very much.